Perfect. So this tonight's presentation is all about youth engagement at Welkin. And so moving on into some brief introductions. As I mentioned before, my name is Serenity and I do use she, her pronouns. And I will be facilitating sort of our wellness information session tonight. And as you'll know, it is all about youth engagement and some specifics about youth engagement at Welkin. And so at Welkin, our youth engagement advisory is all about the benefits of youth engagement for wellness and youth engagement focusing on how to improve our community's youth and child mental wellness. And so I'm actually the co-chair for the Oxford branch of Welkin's Youth Engagement Advisory. And as that role, I kind of just send out reminders, make agendas, maybe plan some wellness activities, and I also kind of promote our group in the community. And so for those of you who may not know, we're just going to talk about what is youth engagement. And so as you can see, youth engagement is really about youth leadership, empowerment, decision making, being heard, and especially youth and adults learning from one another. And so specific youth engagement practices are probably going to differ between different groups, but the main takeaway of youth engagement should always be youth leadership and being heard. And it's especially important that youth and adult allies are able to make a power balance, which is usually an imbalanced power relationship. And that way, youth voices are being amplified rather than being spoken over. And so, with that, I feel like it is also important to clarify what youth engagement isn't, which is our next slide. And so, as you know, youth engagement is a partnership between youth and adults, where hopefully that power imbalance is broken down to create an equal level of engagement and participation. Ideally, this imbalance is broken down 100% completely. However, this often is not the case just due to certain aspects and a multitude of factors that we often can't control. It's often not the case that the power imbalance can be completely equalized. And therefore, a good visual is using this ladder on the screen there and going from 1, which is a very poor youth engagement, and quite frankly, not actually youth engagement at all, to 8, which is the ideal youth engagement model. And so the green portion on that ladder there, that's what we consider really, really poor youth engagement. And so it usually almost always involves tokenism, which is when adults probably bring youth into their projects under the appearance that they are seeking their opinion and value their input, when in reality, they're using them as a token piece to promote that they are trying to be inclusive of all ideas, when in reality they're using the youth as a way to promote their project rather than actually seeking youth input. And so the yellow portion of the ladder is considered genuine youth engagement. And so it really involves youth vision and their ideas and opinions shaping these projects. And so as we continue to climb that ladder, the more influence and more decision making that youth have power over. And now, just to break up our session a little bit, we have some discussion questions. And so we have 3 questions here. Feel free again to answer them in the chat. And so, have you ever been involved in youth engagement before, and was it called youth engagement? And have you ever had the opportunity to be involved before and chose not to? And how do you think youth engagement is beneficial to the community? And so I know that I, of course, am involved in youth engagement, but I know I hadn't really heard of youth engagement before I became involved in this group specifically. I know there was a few youth groups in my community, but I had never heard youth engagement. And I know that even when I was involved in certain youth groups, it often didn't feel like the youth had complete power over the decisions we were making. And so youth engagement is actually really beneficial to the community because it just brings in, of course, that entire demographic of youth voice and opinion. And of course, even in our group ourselves, we can't encompass every youth voice, but it definitely brings a new perspective to a table that was often only for adults. And reading the chat here previously weren't allowed. And I think that that's a huge part of what youth engagement is because it needs those adult allies, those community partners to kind of lower that power imbalance to equalize that relationship and say, I want to hear what the youth have to say. Like, I want this opinion at our table. And that's where it becomes so powerful. Yes, thank you. Kind of like at the end of our hub sessions, we have an option to participate in a survey where we ask, how can we make this better for you? That is just a little sliver of youth engagement as well, just asking, what can we do for you? How did it work for you? And how can we be better? About different levels of engagement. And so there are different levels of engagement between different youth groups and even between members of the same group, and it can vary greatly. So one of the many amazing aspects of youth engagement is the fact that members can not only choose how and when they're engaged, but also what area and specific topic they're being engaged in. So for our advisory specifically, we ask all our members to attend just our bi-monthly meetings where we can chat and catch up a little bit with each other, but also update each other on any group projects that we have in the works or projects maybe being started. And from there, we create working groups to focus on specific topics because sometimes they're not, our entire group might not be interested in certain topics, and that's okay. And so we break off into smaller groups so we can get just focused work done. And then we bring those updates back to the main group. And that way members can just focus on projects that truly engage them. And that's what we want. We don't want people to have to work on projects that they might not be wholeheartedly into, and that's okay. And so we use our general meetings updates to also allow anyone who maybe wasn't interested in the planning stages of a project, but maybe they want to be included in the actual facilitation of the project or vice versa. And so it's basically just making sure everyone can be completely committed and comfortable with what level of engagement they're participating in and what area they feel most comfortable. And so again, the most important part, of varying levels of engagement is that youth are able to get as much or as little out of their experience as feels right for them. And so specifically for Wellkin's Youth Engagement Advisory, which is our next slide. So Wellkin's YEA specifically aims to benefit child and mental wellness within our communities and within Wellkin itself. So as a group, we value the needs of our community and we create projects to meet those needs. And so one of said projects is actually this hub, which is very exciting. I spoke a little bit earlier about the sort of creation of the hub, but essentially it was just me, myself, and another youth and one of our adult allies who seen this amazing grant opportunity. And we thought, how can we create a project that's going to benefit our community? And we thought this is a great time to make a sort of one-stop shop where all youth can come to one place and find all the resources they need. And so that's what started sprouting this idea of what the hub eventually is now came to be. and we're still looking to, of course, keep expanding, keep creating, promoting, of course, and just always bringing in what the community needs. And so for 2020, our group has created three main areas that we would like to focus on. And so we've decided to focus on peer mentors, accessibility, and community involvement. And so, as I said, peer mentoring, that project has become the hub. That's one of our main peer mentor initiatives. And so, moving on to accessibility, accessibility is really about making sure wellness and wellkin services is accessible to everyone that needs them. And so, a big project that we're currently working on is our Adult Ally Workshop, which is really exciting. It's been in the works for a little while now, and we're so close to finishing it. And so, as a group, we noticed that were a lot of youth engagement advisories that weren't actually maybe engaging their youth in maybe a positive or meaningful way. And so that's why we wanted to create a workshop that would show maybe how we were doing it and possibly some skills that adult allies could take back to their own groups. And so for community involvement, that's really where we're focusing on improving our community and showing our support for the public. And that is, of course, a very broad topic. And so for that reason, we don't have one large project that we're working on, but instead it's just a bunch of smaller projects to include ourselves within our community. And so our next slide is actually youth engagement as wellness. So for everyone, how do you feel youth engagement can contribute to mental wellness? And so I know for me, it was a big thing to focus on realizing how much impact my voice had. And so, kind of regardless of what interest or focus area specific groups have, when done well, youth engagement really contributes to so many different areas of wellness. Yes, exactly. I'm just reading some of the chat, and giving a sense of belonging and having a voice is so important because, of course, it really does bring youth together. It allows youth to work on interpersonal relationships, those interpersonal communication skills, and it allows for like-minded peers to come together and a sense of volunteerism, giving back to our communities. And it really does give youth a chance to amplify their voices where they might not have had the opportunity to do before. And so I really want to clarify that it's not because that youth are part of a youth engagement group that their voice matters, but it's your voice matters before the group. It's just coming to terms with how powerful your voice really is. And yes, I'm reading another chat, and having a sense of being listened to is so important. Or having your ideas come to life, I know is really satisfying, especially as I said, the hub was in making from November 2019, and we've had a lot of obstacles to sort of overcome. And yet, just to see it all come together was so satisfying, knowing that we came from simply an idea in your head that was maybe written down on paper on a sticky note and having it come to be materialized. And so, I guess my next question is overall, how do you feel about youth engagement after hearing this? And so we have a few more discussion questions after this as well. And so we'll just get our slide going for a second. Perfect. Yes. So how do you feel about youth engagement? And so our next discussion questions are, is there a need within your community that maybe you want to improve? Any ideas that you had? I see some in the chat that we have maybe some big ideas that we're looking to get out there. And can you think of a time when your voice was heard and valued? And have you worked in a truly equal partnership with youth and or adults? And if yes, what was that like for you? Started through one question. So, is there a need within your community that you want to improve? So, I know for me and one of my peers, we were seeing that there were a lot of what felt like cold transfers between services. And so that meant if you went to one service looking for to access something, but they maybe weren't able to help you, instead of just getting a number and saying, call this person, maybe a warm transfer would look like, well, I might not be able to help you here, but let me get you in contact with someone that I know who will be able to help you.
So yeah, youth engagement definitely can be one of those terms that feels really big and really complicated to understand. It might be taken up really different ways at the library than it is at Wellkin, then it might be at a different mental health agency or at a school. But really the heart of youth engagement, if we're like trying to simplify it, and Jess, maybe you could add to this too, or have a different like kind of one sentence. How would you kind of capture youth engagement? To me, youth engagement kind of means youth working on projects or working to give advice or whatever it might be. Youth working to better their community or maybe an agency or their school as equal partners with adults. So it's that process of that partnership, working together on something as advocates and as youth sharing their voice. So Serenity, just before we started the recording again, Serenity was mentioning there's a few different organizations doing some youth engagement work, including the Woodstock Library, and Leeds is still doing some work, we think, with kind of their youth development program as a form of engagement. And I think Jess was just about to add to that too.
Yes, very similar to what you said, Jenna. So when I think about youth engagement, I really think about the word partnership. Oftentimes in our communities, decisions that are made are often very one-sided. You know, it's typically adults making the decision. So when I think about youth engagement, I think about the word partnership. It's really a partnership between youth and adults. And youth being given the opportunities to advocate and to participate in decisions that affect them. So going back to partnership, also in the conversation, sense of belonging has been thrown out a few times. And sense of belonging doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for each person. So that sense of belonging could be just within your core family and caregiver group. It could be within your school community. It could be within your friends. It could be an extracurricular activity that you do. So just that sense of community doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. And so when we talk about advisories too within the community, they're not always named the same thing. So I know that Serenity had mentioned the library. So in St. Thomas, we also at the library, but it's called the Teen Advisory Board. And they don't do the same things as Wellkin, but youth still advise the library on what books they like to read and what events they would like to have. And those are the decisions that affect them. So it can be all different levels. It can be mental wellness, it can be education, it could be recreational, but just really partnerships.
Awesome. So I think Serenity was just asking about those partnerships, if you've kind of had those or experienced that. So I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, so have you ever had the chance to sort of feel that sort of equal relationship between youth and or hopefully adults? Because I know that there is often a struggle and it sometimes is difficult for adult allies and community partners, whether they intended it or not. There's often a struggle and maybe a little bit of difficulty in sort of yielding to that power and creating that equal relationship between an adult and a youth. And so, hopefully, have you ever maybe experienced that? And what was that like for you? And maybe just to start us off, I'm going to share just a little personal story, not too personal, but I know that me and a peer went to go speak with the Rotary Club in Woodstock. And it was honestly a little bit intimidating. It was a room full of maybe 30 adults. And I would like to clarify this was pre COVID 19. We were very safe. And again, maybe 30 adults, all a little bit older. And we were there to speak about youth mental wellness. And stereotypically, older generations not might not have the best ideology of youth mental wellness. And yet me and that same peer got up and stood behind the podium, and just the way they treated us, that feeling of mutual respect coming from each end, and the fact they just wholeheartedly listened to what me and my peer had to say was just, it was almost like an out of body experience, not only to advocate for something that you're really passionate about, but to have a group that you misjudged, thinking that they might not be maybe open completely to the ideas, just to have them wholeheartedly listen and to genuinely ask questions. It was just an amazing experience. Yes, thank you, chat. It did feel like I was about to give them a standing ovation because it really was an amazing experience because just it really is about that open relationship and having that power imbalance completely broken down and to feel like you're on an equal level and that mutual respect, life changing. And we said that we remember getting to co-design a school poetry slam, and it felt very powerful that teachers didn't take it over and let the students plan. One, very exciting for poetry slam itself, but yes, especially in a school setting, because there's not only that imbalance between youth and adult, but there's also the roles of student and teacher. And especially for teachers, I know sometimes just being in that role, it might be sometimes difficult to let themselves ease out of it and let students take charge. But that's really the beauty of having that equal relationship, especially in schools, is that you get those experiences like that and you get to sort of get your hands in there and have a project that was completely you and peer effort. And I think if the chat's going a bit quiet, I think we're good to maybe wrap up our session a little bit. And so our next slide is just thanking you for attending this session and maybe any additional questions And of course, our information for if you're interested in joining our youth engagement advisory at Wellkin for either Elgin County or Oxford County.
Thank you so much, Serenity, for chatting about youth engagement today and for sharing that people can get involved in different ways and sharing all of your experiences. We really appreciate it and are so glad to have you in the hub.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for participating so much in the chat. And thanks you for letting me ramble on about personal stories and my passion for youth engagement.